Hi, we're the Smiths, a homeschooling family who loves to travel every chance we get. And we're currently on our most ambitious adventure yet, 5 weeks in Southern Europe. We're taking and making videos so that friends and family can follow along. After a few days in Naples, we took a train to Rome. My brother had been wanting to buy a suit in Europe, and Italy seemed like a good place to buy a suit. So we found a cool place that had a sale on suits, and so he and Aaron ended up both getting some nice Italian-made suits. The next day was dedicated to Vatican City. So we had heard that the best way to get into St. Peter's Basilica is a kind of a secret or unknown door in the back of the Sistine Chapel. So we scheduled a tour for Vatican City Museum, which would take us to the Sistine Chapel, and then we could just slip on through there to St. Peter's Basilica instead of waiting in line for both venues, which were so long. So we got into our tour, and we got into about an hour and a half of it, and everyone was done. The tour guide was so knowledgeable, but wasn't great at making it entertaining or enjoyable for anyone under adult. So we broke off from our 3-hour tour to go to say Sistine Chapel by ourselves. This was truly amazing. So we get to the door that is supposed to take us into St. Peter's Basilica, and it is only for tour groups now. I think because so many people figured out they could get into the Basilica through there, they made it only for tour groups, and you had to have your tour guide with you to get through. So we decided just to go home. The boys were exhausted, but my brother and I, because Aaron was so gracious, he said, "Why don't you and Taylor go to the Basilica right now by yourselves?" So that's what we did. We walked over to the Basilica and waited in what seemed like half a mile long line, which actually only took us 30 minutes. The line moves very quickly. We were very surprised. So we get in, and it was breathtaking. The artwork, the marble, the statues, sculptures, everything was amazing. Much more amazing than I thought it would be. Afterwards, we walked around that area of Rome looking for somewhere to eat, and we found this little hole-in-the-wall place that had quite a long line, and we thought it must be good. We had time to wait. So we waited for longer than the line for the Basilica. It seemed like forever, but everyone that came out raved about how delicious it was, and it was delicious. It was so good that we went back night after night. Every night we were there in Rome. I took Aaron, and then my brother went later. It was fantastic. The next day, we took the whole family to the Basilica, and the line was even longer, but again, it moves fast. We only waited in line for 40 minutes, and the kids could easily play around the square, look at the fountain, and so it wasn't very troublesome at all. And the boys loved the Basilica. We had read about it in Richard Halliburton's Book of Marvels beforehand, so they could appreciate the works of art in there. Michelangelo and Raphael and so many more amazing artists and sculptors had put sometimes their lifetime into this architecture, this beautiful building. We also went to the Pantheon, where Raphael is buried, and that was cool, but it honestly wasn't as neat inside as other buildings that we had been to, and we also had just been to the Basilica, so our bar was set pretty high. But the outside was amazing, and you can just tell that it is old, thousands of years old. So the outside is amazing. I don't know if it's worth going inside, just depends on how much time you have. That day we also saw the Roman Forum, also a really cool thing to do as a family because the kids can run around, and a lot of things you can climb on, and it was really fun to imagine what was here. So the family was wondering why the old city of Rome is under the new city. How did it get buried? We learned that the river, I believe it was Tiber, it overflows quite often and carries all that silt and sediment, and eventually over time has slowly covered up the Roman buildings. The other interesting thing is that the Romans were so good at building, their cement was so strong that over generations people couldn't break down these buildings to build new ones, so they would just cover it with dirt and build on top of them. The next day was all about gladiators and the Colosseum. So we had a surprise for the boys and took them to gladiator school.
They took us to this little museum that had lots of different types of armor worn by gladiators and ancient Greek and Roman soldiers. There was this one helmet that was from Sparta, which is like a very warlike mountainy part of Greece, and some part of Roman armor that had like this curvy sword. And then the different types of gladiators he showed us, there was this one that was like a fisherman. He had a trident and a net, and his helmet had like a netting covering it. Type of gladiator was called a retiarius, and they represented a fisherman. And then we went to go train.
So, after that museum thing, we went and did at the practice, we pretended to be slaves, and the guy who did the thing had a whip, and he pretended to whip us. And then we had to do the strength training. First you had to go around these bars and go down and up. And then after that you had to do push-ups, and then you had to go through these weaving bags. Then you had to do this, get a board and push it up, like a weight. And then we started fighting. We learned how to attack, So we got a sword, and then somebody made it so defended, and one person hit. So you could do a side cut, a head cut, you could do a lower cut, a middle cut, and you learned how to dodge. All those stuff. After the training, we did gladiator fights. So while we were doing gladiator fights, he chose 2 people, and then my mom was the empress, and then the loser had to bow down if people chose if he didn't die or did die.
The boys loved gladiator school, and I really enjoyed it as well, being the empress and all, and deciding their fates. And it was a good way for the boys to let off some steam, frustration, and energy, and just some good old family fun. So after gladiator school, we immediately went to the Colosseum, and it was really fun for them to experience it kind of hands-on in real life before going to the Colosseum and seeing the place where real gladiators fought. Now, we didn't do the regular tour. We paid for the underground tour, which is actually really hard to get into. You have to do it a certain amount of time in advance, and the spots fill up quickly, but it was so worth it, being able to go to the underground tunnels and the old elevators that lifted up animals and plants and gladiators onto the stage. So I highly recommend doing that. It was really cool. The last thing we did in Rome was visit the museum and crypt of the Capuchin Friars. Now, this is not something we I had heard about to do in Rome, but it was definitely worth seeing. I don't have any pictures or videos because you're not allowed to take pictures or videos in the museum or crypt. It is a sacred place, but just as an overview or a summary of what it is a crypt with lots of bones that have been made into artwork, human bones. Now these are hundreds of years old, and there was a friar from France who fled to Rome, and he asked if he could use these bones to make artwork. And since most of the bones or the bodies were friars, then they said, sure, you can do that. And then after he passed away, he asked for his bones to be used in the artwork. If you are in Rome, you must visit it. There's just something about seeing it in person. It is so creepy, but in a beautiful way. And so after 4 days in Rome, we are headed out of Italy to the next country on our list.